Well, Mr. Tom Sullivan, thanks so much for visiting us today, sharing your expertise.
Thanks, Richard.
Tom will be available for questions afterward. Well, let me ask you to consider whether we have suggested for Building 7, do we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt of explosive-controlled demolition? Just a gross hands in the air. Is this most of you? Okay. We'll come back and ask you at the end relative to World Trade Center 1 and 2. But now you know why we've added a third beam to the two-beam iconic image from the night sky of New York City. And speaking of which, we would like to proceed with the World Trade Center Twin Towers, but I think we have a word from Peter first.
Yes, I would like to ask you for support for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth and for firefighters for 9/11 Truth. We thank you for the admission fee that you paid to join us here tonight, but that really just covers the costs of the theater and the advertising to make people aware of this event. As you know, this is a very challenging undertaking to not only expose the truth and to challenge the myths, but to persuade the opinion leaders, including the corporate media in this country, and our political leaders. So this is a struggle that I hope doesn't go on for a long, long time, but it's probably going to take more than another week or two. So I would like to ask you to reach into your wallet, and I refer to the ATM machines as automatic 20 machines. And if you're able, and this is a guilt-free request, but if you're financially able to support this effort, we would really appreciate it. And while they didn't find the black boxes from the airplanes that hit the towers, we have some black boxes here, and our volunteers are going to be passing them through the seats right now. And I would ask you to reach into your wallet, and if you can pull out a 20 or a couple of 20s, we would very much appreciate your support for this important work. And this isn't just a prop. Can you bring the black box this way for a moment, please?
Thank you for your support. Let's jump into the World Trade Center Twin Towers with our first myth.
Myth. The Twin Towers were not adequately designed.
Let's take a look at that. Even the official spokespersons for NIST say that the building did an admirable job resisting the impacts of these airliners, which they were designed, in fact, to do. There's 47 massive core columns in each tower, and these are almost solid steel at the base, thinning to 2-inch thick at mid-height and 1/4-inch thick at the top. The top is the lightest portion of the building. It's like the Volkswagen sitting on top of the Mack truck. And we'll talk about how that Volkswagen drove straight through the Mack truck, or did it, later. We have a tremendous perimeter exoskeleton structure, a Verandil truss with 3 perpendiculars and 3 verticals, welded together and then in turn bolted together. This is the tube surrounding the core structure. This is a structure within the structure. Any collapsing of the lighter weight floor truss system spanning 60 feet between the core structure and the perimeter structure would have left the core structure standing 1,300 feet in the air, like records falling around a spindle. It's inconceivable that they would have collapsed, particularly as fast as they did.
Myth. Jet-fueled fireballs shot down the elevator shaft and blew out the lobby windows.
All right, again, we should look at the manual, NFPA 18.12.2, high explosives. High explosives are characterized by a detonation propagation mechanism.
I think his
The effect.
We're doing a quick audio adjustment here. Go ahead, Eric.
I'm going to start over. NFPA 18.12.2, high explosives. High explosives are characterized by a detonation propagation mechanism. And common high explosives are dynamites, water gel, TNT, ANFO, RDX that Tom was talking about. The effects produced by diffuse phase, fuel-air explosions, and solid explosives are very different. And I want to be clear here. Diffuse phase, just put it in layman's terms, fuel-air is like the jet fuel, and that on those planes would have been a diffuse phase explosion. It wouldn't have been a high explosive. In a diffuse phase explosion, structural damage will tend to be uniform and omnidirectional, and there will be relatively widespread evidence of burning, scorching, and blistering. Now, any firefighter who's seen an explosion or a flashover, the after effects of that, we always see scorching, we see burning, you'll see soot on the roof, on the ceiling, on the walls, everything's basically burned in that room. And in contrast, the rate of combustion of a solid explosive, which thermite or any of these other chemicals would have been, is extremely fast in comparison to the speed of sound. Therefore, pressure does not equalize to the explosion volume, and extremely high pressures are generated near the explosive. The pressure and the resultant level of damage rapidly decay with distance away from the center of the explosion. So now we're going to look at, and I just want you to pay attention here. This is, the Nade brothers made a film. They recorded the first plane strike, and they came in the lobby with Chief Pfeiffer here and his crew. And I want you to pay attention. What we were originally told, and in this video you're going to hear them, they plant the first seed that this was a jet-fueled fireball that came down the elevator shaft. And I just want you to think about that for a second, because if you think about an elevator shaft, there's an elevator car in there. And in that car, those doors, when it's in between floors, those doors are closed. So in all those elevator shafts in the World Trade Center, there's multiple banks, and they went to different levels. So you have some mid-stops, you have some full shaft, you have some go down in the basement. There's just multiple banks of elevators. So not all of these elevator shafts go all the way down to the lobby. And vice versa, a lot of these go down into the basement. So what they've told us is that fireball came down, blew out the lobby windows, which you're going to see here, and blew out the lobby windows. So what that means is that fireball had to find those elevator shafts, but the doors would have been closed up top where the plane struck. So it had to shear those elevator shafts at the top. Then that fireball in the explosives or the explosive wave would have had to come down that shaft, and then that would have meant those cars should have been stopped in the basement level, just the one floor below, because the elevator car would have acted as a plunger. It would have had to blow open those elevator doors in the lobby, and then we would have seen, and then I could have believed it. I originally believed it because that's what I was told. But here we're going to look at this. We're going to look at this video, and what I want you to pay particular attention to is the ceilings, the walls, the floors, and there's plants in here. Any fire I've been into that's consumed the entire, where you have a fireball come, we don't get fireballs, but when you have that type of thing happen, you're going to see some wilting of the plants, or probably they won't even be there anymore.
Pfeiffer was the first chief into the building.
So look at the damage. It's
right
not
away,
uniform.
A guy from the Port Authority told him the damage was somewhere above the 78th floor.
Look at the ceiling, perfectly white, walls white,
around.
plants intact.
Obvious. Something had happened right there in the lobby.
Windows, irregular damage.
You just saw that all the windows.
All the plant. Now look at the
lobby looked like the plane hit the lobby.
Look at the elevator cars when they show them.
They figure out that flaming jet fuel had shot straight down the elevator shaft.
All of this damage was done already.
Elevator cars intact.
People was all over the place.
Elevator doors.
So you knew it was going to be worse.
Well, that was just a lead into this. The other thing we were told was that when this collapsed, and Richard's going to get into that, those elevator shafts came into play again here.
These are, in fact, evidence of explosives. Let me ask you.
In all the videos of the collapses, explosions can be seen bursting from the building 20 to 30 stories below the demolition wave. Here, 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 here. Here. And here.
Well, NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, tells us that these are puffs of air being produced by that giant piston pushing air down through the elevator shafts. We'll look at that in a moment. But first of all, these are not puffs of air. These are pulverized building materials. You can see the solids. In addition, they are occurring at 160 to 200 feet per second. These are explosive speeds, not air pressure.
I would like to ask you for support for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth and for firefighters for 9/11 Truth. We thank you for the admission fee that you paid to join us here tonight, but that really just covers the costs of the theater and the advertising to make people aware of this event. As you know, this is a very challenging undertaking to not only expose the truth and to challenge the myths, but to persuade the opinion leaders, including the corporate media in this country, and our political.
Well, Mr. Tom Sullivan, thanks so much for visiting us today, sharing your expertise.
Thanks, Richard.
Tom will be available for questions afterward. Well, let me ask you to consider whether we have suggested for Building 7, do we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt of explosive controlled demolition? Just a gross hands in the air. Is this most of you? Okay, we'll come back and ask you at the end relative to World Trade Center 1 and 2. But now you know why we've added a third beam to the two-beam iconic image from the night sky of New York City. And speaking of which, we would like to proceed with the World Trade Center Twin Towers, but I think we have a word from Peter first.
Yes.